Welcome to the Configure Price Quote podcast. My name is Frank Sohn and I'm the founder of No CPQ Consulting. This podcast is 100% focused on Configure Price Quote, also known as CPQ, and will provide you useful insights into this topic. My guest today is Rick Hassman. Rick is the CEO of Lean Tech Advisors and the practice lead of supply chain management and manufacturing at DocuLabs. He was also the CIO of Pella, a manufacturer of windows and doors for many years. And Rick has over 25 years of business experience and lives with his family in Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome, Rick, to the CPQ podcast.
Great to be here.
Excellent. Hey, Rick, I invited you today to the CPQ podcast to discuss a blog post I recently posted and a blog post from you where you actually mentioned my blog post. So we will have the links to both of these blog posts in the show notes. But before we get there, let me ask you a couple of more personal questions, right? So you have a ton of business experience, as I just mentioned, mostly with Pella, but also in a number of other roles. So let's start by giving us a short overview of your roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, sure. I started my career, believe it or not, working for Pella right out of school. I was a production manager, continued my career in production management by going to a toy company, Ertl Toy, in the Field of Dream town in Iowa, Dyersville, Iowa. And that's where I transitioned my career from manufacturing over into technology. I like to say I was hand selected to lead a system transformation, but in reality, I was the only plant manager that could log into a computer. So I spent some time with that transformation and then had the opportunity to come back to Pella to lead their complete system transformation. And that transformation really included every part of the business, from initial leads, from the orders, manufacturing, marketing, service. So spent a lot of time focusing in that area. And eventually, through that progression, through that work, I moved into the role as CIO and spent the last 7 years at Pella in the CIO role. Then my wife and I decided the long winters in Iowa had really gotten to us. So we decided to make a move. And we decided we were going to pick wherever. Our kids, when they graduated from high school, we were going to pick wherever in the country. And we selected Charleston, South Carolina. Selecting Charleston would tell you, okay, I couldn't continue as the CIO. So that led to the opportunity where I spent some time as a vice president of customer advocacy at Oracle, vice president of business development at Workiva, and then started my own company called Lean Tech Advisors. So that's the long career, as short as I can tell you about it, Frank.
It's very cool. So it has some very cool parts in there. One question, when and where did you get started working with CPQ tools along the way?
So it's interesting. Most people don't realize how complex windows are. Windows can be built on the 1/8-inch increment to fill the opening in a house. It has all the different colors, the types of glass, the grill patterns. We actually hired a consultant to help us figure out how many possible configuration options there are. And it's 8 octillion. Do you know what 8 octillion is, Frank?
How many zeros does that have?
Yes, that's 27 zeros. So it's a very complex, and that's really what got me into the CPQ space. Everything was configured. We would run upwards to 20,000 order line items a day at Pella, and 99% of those were configured at entry point automatically using the CPQ process. I did a lot of presentations in the CPQ space. We actually hosted, for 13 years straight, we hosted a showcase at Pella where companies came from all over the United States and even outside of the United States to learn how we did lean manufacturing, how we worked with Oracle, and most importantly, how we did configure to order. So that's really where I got into that space. I actually created a character, believe it or not, Frank, during that time as we were talking to a bunch of different companies about configure to order. I created a character called Demi, and it meant dimensions, because that dimension aspect is really what drives the complexity in configure to order space. So I can introduce you to Demi if you'd like sometime, Frank.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. And we will talk about that more in a minute. One thing I wanted to ask you also, because in preparation for the meeting, obviously I went to the LeanTech website, had a look at that. And on that one, you also mentioned that you have built a respected reputation as a credible advocate for change. Tell me a little bit more about what that means and why that's important to your clients.
Yeah, I was fortunate. Pella it's an amazing company. It's a culture of change, which I really believe is critical. If you're going to really succeed, you have to have that culture. I always focus change with two key elements, really about process and a mentality of lean. And when I simplify it that way, it's really, you can use your process to identify waste, and then technology kind of becomes a key to address the waste. So if the change that you're doing is not attacking one of the forms of waste that exist in companies, then you shouldn't be doing it. Well, that approach really, I think, resonated with my team, with the folks that I worked, and gave me that credibility. They felt comfortable when we were driving something. We were approaching it in a manner that would get the best results, but also, take into account the entire process.
Love the definition, and look forward to talk about it more in a minute. But one thing I wanted to ask you, and I ask every guest on the CPQ podcast, is what do you do when you don't work?
Well, unfortunately, I live in a beautiful place called Seabrook Island, South Carolina. We back up to the marsh and the ocean. And my number one choice is, if I get free time, I have kayaks that I go out fishing. And everybody says it's cheating a little bit, Frank, because my kayaks have center console trolling motors in them. And then I steer with my feet. So my hands are free, whether I'm holding a fishing pole or maybe some beverage also, Frank.
That's very cool. How often per week do you have actually time to do that?
I usually try and go one day on the weekend. Then during vacation times, I'll go some, maybe more often than that. But I usually try and go once a week. It's most of the time it ends up being every other week, because my wife might have some chores that I need to do. But it's quite often I'll be able to make it out there.
Very cool. And I think you're the first one who mentions that, right? So also was the engine in the middle. So that's very cool. Anyway, hey, thanks for sharing that. Then let's talk a little bit more about the topic I had invited you for, right? So, and that's the key business requirements for the fenestration industry. Tell us first what that is and what the key requirements are for that industry.
Yeah, so fenestration, I always say, is just a fancy word for any opening in your house. So it's your windows, doors, your garage doors can be part of that, but it's any opening, and it's the industry that fills that opening, installs or makes the product. And as I mentioned earlier, with that 8 octillion combinations, configuration is critical there, because it's so precise. You have to fit that product into that opening, and it has so many different options and requirements, whether it's in design pressure of the building, whether you're in a hurricane zone, or you're combining two different windows. There's just so many very specific rules that make the configuration engine critical. And I always like to separate it. When I talk about CPQ, I talk about two key components of the configuration tool. So the sales is the front end piece of it. And sales are, if you got a salesperson and you are wanting to make sure that the window that you're quoting, you get the right price, and the options are valid options, meaning you can make or select these things together. That's what's critical on the sales end. Once you have that sales end, then we pass it into the manufacturing end. So manufacturing for me, and in many configurators, they kind of combine those together. We separated them because we couldn't control the sales in some cases. We had to use the configurator from Lowe's, or if Home Depot had a different configurator. We had to accept the information from their configurator, and then we brought it into the manufacturing. And the manufacturing creates all the details necessary for your manufacturing facility. So at Pella, we used WTS Paradigm for the front end sales and quoting part of it. And then we used Oracle for the manufacturing configurator.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So that's important for every customer, right? So that you have these two potentially different purposes where you use the configurator. Anyway, so you worked at Pella for a long time. How many different CPQ vendors and their solutions did you look at during that time?
Well, we looked at quite a few during various stages. So as I mentioned, I led the transformation. So a key component of our transformation was to have a application that could support that complexity, that could support dimensions in the manufacturing process. And then, we also looked at the front end sales configurator, and some softwares are able to do both, and make it seamless as you go through there. But and we even built our own, Frank. When I first started back in 2000, Pella had built its own front end configuration tool, and we tried to upgrade that, but the complexity and the requirements for the customer drove us at that time to then partner with WTS Paradigm. So that was back in about 2004 on the front end sales. On the back end, or the total configurator, we did an evaluation of probably 10 different ERP sales manufacturing configurator companies, which were at that time PeopleSoft, SAP, Bond, Infor, and that's when we landed on Oracle as a key tool for us back in 2000.
Got it. Now I have to build a little bit of a bridge for our listeners, Rick. So because we got to know each other through this blog post, right? So, and I had written this blog post with the title "Risks to Customers When a Small Software Company is Purchased by a Large Industry Company." And in that blog post, I mentioned the Salesforce acquisition of MuleSoft as an example, right? So, and I just mentioned some key points here again to set the stage for our listeners that didn't read the blog post, right? So the first one was the acquiring company is focusing the bulk of their development efforts on making the acquiring company stronger. Second point was M&As can be challenging times for customers and they are not a guaranteed success. Third one was customers of the acquired company should thoroughly review if the new product still fits their needs by looking at the roadmap of the new combined company and product. and customers of the acquired company should determine if the people changes at the new combined company are positive to their business process. And last was customers of the new combined company should determine if and how process and system changes impact their business. I suggested that the customer should not just accept the M&A, but reevaluate themselves to determine if their current CPQ solution is still their best solution. And I think you mentioned that as well in your blog post, and you also talk about the paradigm acquisition by Builders FirstSource. You're obviously a very good person to talk about that, because you mentioned you used them since 2000, right? So tell me a little bit more about that acquisition and your thoughts about it.
Yeah, I mean, I read your article, Frank, and it struck home for many reasons, because, being in the technology, there's companies that are acquiring other technologies, and I see change. I've been part of technology companies that acquired, and all of the points that you made are really valid, and they have an impact. They have an impact on the people that are using that software that got acquired. And I've seen the results in many different ways. I've seen some where it's fantastic, build on each other's strengths. And I've seen where times where the focus completely changes, and that leaves the customer at a point that we've got to decide. We had to make decisions many times. Do we keep going with that particular software? Well, it struck me, because it's even more unusual when a non technology firm like a Builders FirstSource buys a software that's used by its competitors. So I always thought in my head, it's like, wow, if I was still CIO at Pella, how would I feel about that? Because that's, you have to, I think most people admit that's pretty unusual. So a lot of the points, and that's what I wrote about in my article. It's what is going to happen? I mean, Builders FirstSource has a different go-to-market than say a Pella has, or an Anderson, or a Lowe's. And so as their own that software, where is their priority going to be? I mean, are they? Is the focus really going to be inward? So that's really what made me think. And I had a really strong relationship with WS Paradigm, and know the folks really well, and we had a strong partnership. So nothing but good things to say. But as again, your article really triggered me, and I thought about this as, wow. I mean, where is that focus going to be? What's their strategy long term? And hate to even say it, it's will they still want to exist in to be a software vendor?
Novo CPQ Consulting helps you with all CPQ related questions. For example, we help customers to find the best CPQ solution for their business, and we help customers analyze their current business process to determine if and where CPQ can help. Here it's important to point out that we are 100% independent and always look out for our customers first. This means for us also that we don't get paid by any CPQ vendor for providing them new customers or for any other services. We are focused on our customers and always provide the best available information to them. We also help system integrators to improve their services, and we offer the only CPQ industry subscription that provides monthly CPQ news and trends. We have many other services, so check it out today at novocpq.com. Send me an email to frank.sohn@novocpq.com to learn how we can help you with your CPQ questions, and keep us in mind when you look for 100% impartial CPQ advice. And what do you think does this acquisition mean to the broader fenestration industry?
WTS Paradigm built a really strong base, and they focused in fenestration. And I think based on our discussion, you can kind of understand some of the specific complexities that in the fenestration industry drive requirements of your CPQ tool. So they focused in that space, and I've seen a few others that are focused in that space. To now have that kind of pulled and owned by a competitor to the people that are using it, I think there was a lot of uncertainty, and there's still a lot of uncertainty. And it's not an easy thing to switch, Frank. I mean, to move to a different CPQ tool is not an easy factor. So a lot of people in the industry are weighing their options, and you can't wait too long to make a change because the amount of time. So there's definitely a lot of uncertainty in the industry. A lot of people evaluating, how they should respond to this, and seeing more so the actions of Builders FirstSource than what they may say publicly.
And if we follow up on that a little bit more, and give me maybe one or two main concerns that you have from a customer, from a channel partner point of view.
Yeah, from a customer standpoint, I mean, I would say my three main concerns would be prioritization and focus. Meaning, when I was the CIO at Pella and our team was working with WTS Paradigm, we were always working hand on hand on what enhancements, what bug fixes, what a future or strategy would be, and then the need to fix things really quickly. That's the focus. So that was one. The strategy then is, where are their plans to take the software? What are the most important, enhancements, most important problems that they want to solve with that software? So do they really align? Because now they're owned by somebody who, might have different software or might have different strategies. So that's the other piece. It's just, okay, well, as they lay out their strategy, does it align with, the customer? And then for me, that always sits in the back of my head is, the long-term plan. I've had software companies that, bought another software and it just folded into their business, and that it just, it didn't continue as a business. So that I don't see that happening right away, but that's always a question of long-term. Does Builder FirstSource still want to be in that business as a software vendor?
Got it. Let me ask you one question also going back to your Pella experience, right? So especially with M&A, did you have any experience with M&A at Pella? And if so, what were the key learnings?
Yeah, we definitely bought in multiple different types of business, to add on either to an existing product that we have or to get into a different industry, whether getting into the vinyl industry or getting into aluminum or high end. So we definitely acquired. The key learning for me is that's not Pella's forte. I mean, we didn't do it enough to be really good at it. So every time it was kind of recreating the plan. Every time we did it, it was, different struggles, different results. a lot of unexpected. And I would tell you, it took a long time to really get the benefits out of the merger piece of it. And in some cases, we didn't get it. And that, so I kind of associate that the same, my take, as an outside observer, Builders FirstSource is not a company that's in the M&A industry. It's not something that's a natural skill or a natural play for them. So, I think some of those same experiences of just understanding, how do you merge these things? How do you merge different cultures? How do you adapt to a business that they're not familiar with? And how do you prioritize that against, some of the key initiatives or the focus of Builders FirstSource for the longest time.
Got it. So then one question obviously is also, what do you suggest should customers of Paradigm do now?
Yeah, I think, two things. They've got to pay close attention to, the critical components of their relationship and see and read the actions that are demonstrated, not listen to the words. So if you start seeing some of the delays in response time, or if you start, feeling like your input isn't as valued, it may be natural, because there's now a much more focused priority by the owner of the company. To build those. So I would always watch those real close and see if it really supports the strategy. Then I would, in parallel, I would absolutely be exploring your options. Because like, as I mentioned before, this is to make a change, it's going to take a lot of time. And in the fenestration space, the complexity around the configuration, both from the sales and the manufacturing, there's only a couple of vendors out there that are poised to handle this fenestration capability. And I think, we mentioned WTS Paradigm's one, and another one that has really inserted themselves into this process is Infor. And Infor's built much more industry specific capability, into their offering. And the other thing, that, because to me, when I look at CPQ and I look at the fenestration, you can talk about CPQ, but you've got to not only be able to have the ability to handle the complexity in the sales process, but you've got to have a software on the back end that can handle the huge number of options and allow that to flow through the process. So being able to connect that front end into that back end and run that smooth through the process and then keep up with the technologies, that's what I think people really need to explore.
Got it. But I want to follow up on one thing that you mentioned, right? So also for customers to keep track of the operational changes, right? So how should they do that? How can you even do that as a customer?
Well, I think that those that have been partners with WTS Paradigm have built they've built a routine, they've built a process that they engage with and really, kind of understand how they can get their requests and how they can look at and get things fixed, that might be issues, or get enhancements on the list. So understanding that operational piece really is paying attention to changes that occurred from the normal function, the way that you've done it. You also then look at the enhancement list. You can see what new feature functionality has been added, and look at, well, who's that really targeted for? So it's, with any software vendor, you see the enhancements, you can see the response times, and you can see, where the changes are focused, what problems they're trying to solve. And if those don't meet the core problems that you have, that's where you start seeing and keeping track of the operational changes.
Excellent. And I think that was a very good insight into the fenestration industry and some pretty timely topic based on our blog posts, right? So unfortunately, we're coming to the end of this podcast episode. And so my last question is, what's a good way for interested listeners to contact you or to follow up with any questions based on what we just discussed?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn for sure, Rick Hassman. And connect with me there. I am very active on LinkedIn, or you can send me a direct message at rick.hassman@leantechadvisors.com.
Excellent. So, we will have all this information in the show notes, Rick, so people can find it there. Hey, thank you very much for making time for the CPQ podcast today.
Yes, thank you, Frank. Really enjoyed our conversation.
I'd like to thank everyone for listening and hope you learned something interesting today. If you like the podcast, please go ahead and rate it on iTunes or share it with your friends and colleagues. In the meantime, you can find us online at www.novocpq.com. So long, everyone.